Welcome to the Powerful Vulnerability Podcast, where we believe in the transformative power of storytelling from the heart. I'm Dr. Ashley.
And I'm Catherine Russler.
We are so glad you're here. Many stories here are extraordinary.
And some carry quiet wisdom.
All teach us.
Dr. Ashley, this is episode number 1. We have a powerful lineup of interviews in coming episodes, and I want to set the stage with your memoir, Coming Free, because it's one of the most honest books I've read, and because it details an epic quest for connection that led you on adventures both terrible and beautiful, and that built a deep wisdom within you.
Thank you. I'm so grateful to be here and to be able to share some of my journey with our listeners.
Dr. Ashley is now a dentist with 2 beautiful boys and has started this podcast to encourage meaningful connection and communal wisdom. Today, in part 1 of this 2-part interview, Dr. Ashley recounts how unmet needs in childhood propelled her decades-long quests and how negotiating with God can turn out. Dr. Ashley, in your dedication you write, I dedicate this book to the hard parts of life, the ones that tried to hold us down, but truly give us our wings. So let's start at the beginning of Coming Free. In the first pages, you describe a childhood where you slowly realized that your parents neglected you and your brother. Can you talk about this journey?
Sure. So I don't think as a kid I had any idea that we were being neglected. I think it was much later in life once you start to compare your stories with other people's. Once I had children of my own and realized how much time I spent with them, that I really noticed my parents' absence. I talked in the book about things like my mother would forget to pick me up from school. She would leave me outside. I grew up in upstate New York, and it would be the month of February and 10 degrees outside. And I would stand outside in the era before cell phones for 2, 3, 4 hours waiting for her to pick me up in the snow. I got frostbite twice in high school from just not having appropriate footwear to wear in the snow. They were just absent from our lives, not only physically, but emotionally. If I look back through my memories, I don't have any memories of spending actual time with my parents as a child. We didn't play board games. We didn't talk about things. When I got into high school, we didn't talk about boys. We didn't talk about friends. They just weren't there for us.
You talked in the book about how your brother had a parallel journey and how the abandonment affected him differently. Can you talk about that?
Sure. So I think for me, in my attempt for my parents to notice me, I just wanted to be the most perfect child that I could be. I got all A's in school. I was on the track team. I was on the Model United Nations. I tried to do everything right. I would make them dinner for when they got home from work. And I tried to just be this exemplary daughter so that they would hopefully notice and heap just piles of praises on me for how wonderful I was, which didn't really happen. My brother, on the other hand, had a completely different path that he walked looking for attention. So he started failing out of school. He's a super smart guy and just started getting C's and D's and F's. He got in trouble. He got detention after detention. He got in-school suspension. He got out-of-school suspension. He started becoming interested in the party scene. It got so bad that my sophomore year of high school, which was my brother's junior year of high school, we're just 1 year apart, my parents actually disenrolled him from the public high school that we both went to and sent him to a live-away military school about 5 hours from home. He didn't last very long. It was a really difficult place for him, and it was a really sad time in our lives for both me and for him, seeing him go through that struggle. He also was dating a girl at the time. So when I was a sophomore, she was a freshman. He was a junior. So we were all kind of very similar ages, just a few months apart. Her and I are only like 2.5 months apart. And she also had some home life issues. Her parents were both addicts. There was some abuse issues in her home. So she started just spending the night at our house every single night. And then it got to the point where I would come home from school and the only person who was home was my brother's girlfriend. Eventually, it got to the point where she honestly, even legally, just lived at our house. My brother had gotten into some trouble. There was a fight. My parents ended up calling the police. And when the police were there, they were like, we don't want this girl in our house anymore. You need to make her leave. And the policeman had asked all of these questions. How long has she been here for? How many nights in a row has she stayed here? And because it had been, I think, over 90 days was the statute, she was an actual resident of our house.
That's wild. They were so young.
They were so young. And then they moved to a different city. They moved all the way out to Arizona, just the two of them. They were so young.
In seventh grade, you developed anorexia, thinking it would lead your parents to notice you. And hunger for both food and connection became themes throughout the book. Can you talk about how they're interrelated for you?
Yeah. So I had this friend. Actually, growing up, my three best friends were all named Laura. So there was Laura, Laura, and Laura. And so one of the Lauras had this ploy when we were in seventh grade that she went out and declared, I am anorexic. I am going to starve myself to death. And all of the moms in the neighborhood were so concerned about Laura. I remember my mom coming out and being like, oh my God, have you heard about Laura? Have you talked to her? Is she okay? What should we do? She was on the phone with Laura's mom. They were on the phone all together with the other Laura's moms, and they were all so concerned about Laura. And the whole event maybe lasted 2 or 3 weeks until whatever happened and she decided that, oh, just kidding, I'm not going to starve myself to death anymore. Her parents paid more attention to her. Her goal was achieved. She went on to live a happy, well-adjusted, normal life. Me seeing that, I was like, wow, she is brilliant. I am going to do that too, but I'm going to be so much better at it and so much more dedicated because I am a type A, perfectionist, ridiculous human being, and I will do things all the way. I think, flaw in my scheme of my 12-year-old, 11-year-old brain here was that I didn't come out and announce my intentions like Laura did. I just stopped eating and fell into, really honestly, this deep pit of anorexia. I started to become so restrictive with my calories, journaling my food, restricting myself to no more than 800 calories a day. Mind you, I was on the track team. I was an active rock climber. I would get up in the morning and run 5 miles before school, go through the school day, go to track practice, weight room, sit-ups, running, whatever they had for us that day. And then after that, I would go to the rock gym and climb for 2 or 3 hours a night. So I was burning massive amounts of calories. My friends actually called me aerobics Barbie, and I didn't eat. And so I waited for someone to notice, and no one noticed. It got to the point where my senior year of high school, there was a Red Cross blood drive at the school, and my parents signed the permission slip for me to be able to donate blood. I went through the process. I donated my blood, and then when I got up to leave, I passed out. And that's a normal occurrence that happens, especially I think people's first time giving blood. And they turned me upside down in this whole chair that's supposed to get the blood back to your brain. And I had a skirt on that day, and the whole world got to see my granny panties in the high school gym. It was so lovely. But I never got better. I didn't just drink the apple juice and eat some cookies and go in the upside down chair and then go back to school and go on with my life. From there, I ended up staying home from school for an entire week because every time I stood up, I started to pass out, or I would black out. I would see stars. My heart rate would just go climbing through the roof. And so that 1 week turned into almost 4.5 months of my senior year of high school that, for the most part, I didn't go to school. I eventually ended up, my dad was like, I don't know what to do with you anymore. Why are you not getting better? So one night, like 10 o'clock at night, I was just in my room crying because the world was spinning around me. And he came in and said, do you want me to take you to the hospital? And that to me felt like the first time my dad had paid attention to what I was going through and offered Not only like, here's a plan of something we can do, but like, I will do this with you. And so he did take me to the hospital. The hospital wanted me to see a nutritionist. They wanted me to see a psychiatrist. They wanted me to see a therapist. They wanted me to see a cardiologist. And my dad, who is very old school in his thinking, we only made the appointment with the cardiologist. He said we didn't need any of the rest of it. And, essentially left me to suffer. And it really became more than it started out for me. It no longer was just this quest to be seen. It became part of my self-worth, part of how I dealt with stress in my life, part of how I exerted control over the world around me, which seemed so out of control. And the thought of gaining weight, of no longer being this, perfect, in shape, supposedly human that I was terrifying to me. And even to this day, my self-worth is so wrapped up in my physical appearance. Like, I'm almost 38 years old and unmarried, and my body is starting to change, and I've got dimples on my thighs, and I've got gray hairs, and it's awful that when I look in the mirror, I think, oh my God, no man is ever going to want me again. I'm never going to be able to attract a man like this. When I walk into a room, people are going to look at me differently than they have in the past. My worth is decreased. And I've done a lot of therapy, but it's still there. And it stems all back from neglect in my childhood.
Your memoir gave me a new understanding of why anorexia is so ravaging and hard to recover from. You actually describe it as a beast of an addiction, and I never thought of it in that way. I thought describing it that way is important to share. Can you talk about it a little bit more?
Yeah, so I do describe it as a beast, even in my own head, just on a daily basis. It's this monster that lives inside of me. And it's almost feels unfair to me that if you have other sorts of addiction, like say you're addicted to alcohol, right? They tell you things like, don't go to the bar, don't go to a situation where you would be presented with alcohol, don't go to the same parties you used to go to, don't hang out with the same people you used to drink with, don't have it in the house, to minimize your temptations. But when you have anorexia, which I'm calling essentially an addiction to not eating food, you can't get away from it ever. Every single day, 1,000 million times every single day, you have to decide, am I going to eat something or am I not going to eat something? Am I hungry? Do I need this? Should I listen to my body? Is this just a craving I have? Will this make me gain weight? Will it not make me gain weight? Is this what I need? I don't know how to listen to my body anymore. I have so depressed my hunger pains for so many years that I don't even know that they happen. All of a sudden I'll be like, oh, I'm really shaky. I haven't eaten in 14 hours. I should probably do that, right? So it's difficult. Anything that you want to do socially inside your home is this constant balance of what do I need versus what do I want. And sometimes your wants are cake and sometimes your wants are starvation. And it's really difficult to try and manage in a healthy way.
For most of the memoir, it's notable how little you mention your mom. Was it a conscious decision to write so little about her?
Yes and no. I think that I write so little about my mom because there seems to be so little to write about. Like I said, if I look through my memories of growing up, I don't have a lot of memories with my mom. I remember her being at work. I remember her being late to pick me up. I remember going to the grocery store sometimes. But I don't have memories of just spending time with her or playing with her or going places. We didn't go on family vacations. We just didn't spend time together. So whereas my dad and I have struggled through our relationship a lot more in tension and in an attempt to heal, have tried to understand each other more in time. We've had more conversations. There were more things to say because I had more understanding of him as a person. My mom tends to just kind of be a blank. She's also very sensitive. So I always am concerned about hurting her feelings just with everything in life. My dad calls her a delicate flower. And so she needs to be protected and respected and not spoke ill of. And I didn't really have anything unill to say.
You write about your dad's immigration story and his journey for education, and he became a dentist, and you witnessed a lot of this journey as a young child. How was this formative for you?
So my dad grew up in Iran. His family moved here when he was 12 years old. And what I was told all the time, they left everything behind to come to America for better education opportunities for their children. That was just, it's like a principle of our family. Everybody must be educated. And the other principle in our family that everybody can recite from heart is hard work always pays off. My dad started dental school when I was 3 years old, which is also when my mom started college because she grew up in a family that did not value women being educated. And so once she was married to my dad, he encouraged her to go to school. And you could tell that they worked really hard. I guess some memories I have of my mom, she used to take us to class with her, me and my brother, because she didn't have anybody to watch us. And so we would sit in these lecture halls in classes on chemistry and physiology and, have to be quiet and sit under the desk. And when we did have conversations, she would talk to me about her English finals that were coming up and how she didn't know what to do for this research paper she was doing. And right, I was 3 or 4 years old. I didn't even know that we spoke English. Like I had never even heard the word English before. So this is the relationship we had. But my dad, we would visit him at the dental school where he would go to the sim lab, which is what we call it in dentistry. It's a simulation, right? Where you do your fillings and crowns and things like that on essentially plastic teeth on this like fake mannequin dude that pretty much everybody calls Dexter. I didn't know any of that when I was 3, but I remember going to the lab and riding up and down on the chairs with him and playing with the wax. And they had these little flame things and being like, oh, this is so cool. We went to the bookstore at the university together. I remember he had to buy a sheep's eyeball to dissect, which I thought was like the weirdest thing. It came in this little like jar floating around. Anyways, I also remember that he had a giant whiteboard that he put up in our kitchen at home, and he would do all of his like studying, writing out formulas, writing out pharmacology, all that kind of stuff on the whiteboard. And because this was way back in the day, we had one of those printers that, remember printed the long continuous piece of paper with those little like holes on the side. And so he printed out one of those with that eep, eep, and it said, just do it. And he hung it on the wall above the whiteboard. And when he was studying for his boards, I remember my mom had a job in a different town, about an hour away. And so she would stay with family during the week. And my dad would take me and my brother to school, take care of us, all of that stuff. And then he would stay up the whole night for multiple nights in a row cramming for his boards. And he would tell us how he pulled an all-nighter, how he hadn't slept, how he had all of this stuff to study. And you could see the books and everything everywhere. And so I think that we are a product of our environment. And this is essentially what I was told and was exemplified to me as being kind of the gold standard of what you can be and what you should grow up to achieve is this hardworking, never stopping, study all night long, just do it person.
In college, you got picked for an alternative spring break mission in Reynosa, Mexico. And it's the first time you experienced radical love and had the opportunity to practice it. How was this transformative for you?
It changed my everything. It dumped my world upside down. Getting outside of the box that I grew up in and being in a completely different box where almost nothing was the same, right? The sky was still blue. That was about it. All your other foundational truths really shifted for me being in that environment and understanding how much the world needed people to do something real. It really showed me, like, what was I doing? Getting a degree in French at a fancy liberal arts school in Virginia. I had all of this privilege and opportunity and vast wealth in comparison to the people around me in Reynosa. And it seemed like what was I doing with it? I was gonna read books in French and maybe teach French to people one day. And what was kind of the meaning? What was the point of it? What was I doing with my life on this earth if all I was doing was maybe teaching French? So it really changed the course of everything for me and what I understood as what you can achieve in life, not just my dad's version of academia and letters after your name, but you could actually impact lives and families and children and moms. And the weight of that was so much more than what I had grown up understanding you should try to achieve, that it just, like I said, dumped my world upside down.
You returned to your liberal arts school and you got so depressed. Life felt so meaningless for you that you ended up dropping out of school and going back to Reynosa.
Yeah, I did. I just couldn't justify the price tag of being there for what I felt the outcome was going to be. Like, why would I spend $20,000 or $30,000 a year towards college tuition when it's not going to get me where I really want to go, which is that making that difference in impoverished areas.
And your dad couldn't understand it at all. He just had no context for processing what you were going through. And he made it clear that you weren't welcome at home and you ended up going all over the world. If your dad had been welcoming of you in that period, would you have still traveled globally doing volunteer work, or were you also seeking refuge, or both?
I think it's a combination of a lot of things. If you take into the fact that I was 19 years old, I had no financial stability on my own, which therefore, when I no longer had a dorm room at William and Mary and no longer had my parents' house to go to, fundamentally, physically, where was I going to go? And so part of it became going wherever would welcome me, going wherever living costs were low and affordable. I ended up sleeping on people's floors, working in kitchen restaurants, and then hoarding all of my money for plane tickets to Ukraine or to Ghana. I ended up spending a lot of time in Reynosa. I ended up with $2 to my name in Mexican pesos in my hand and nothing else. So I think that was one part of it. I definitely think that no matter what my dad had said, I had within me and still have within me that just urge to not only see the world, but to like touch the world, be part of the fabric of the world. And that is what has always caused me to continuously travel and now travel with my children. My 13-year-old has been to 14 countries. It's something that's important to me to expose them to different cultures, different ways of life, and so that they can understand the privileged life that they do lead. I also do think that, like you said, it was finding refuge, not only physically, but emotionally. I was looking for my people, right? I had never really had a close relationship with my family. And then all of a sudden it felt like I just didn't have a family. My brother was doing his own thing. My parents were no longer talking to me. My mother would every once in a while, she wasn't allowed to call me, but she would every once in a while, she would call me like every couple of months to just make sure I was okay. One time she sent me money so I could get my hair cut because I was like stealing people's underwear and tampons out of church bathrooms. And yeah, she sent me like $25 so I could go get my hair cut one time. But I was looking for connection and relationships. When I ended up living in Reynosa, we had a community of, we called ourselves Los Voluntarios, right? The volunteers. It was like our little amalgamation of the word. And we were a really close-knit community. We became best friends. We were excellent supports for each other. There's probably like 10 of us that just became really, really close. And it felt like a family and a support system that I had never had before. And so at the end of the summer, when everybody dispersed and went back to their colleges and regular lives, I was left with this void of, for the first time, understanding what it could be like to have emotionally intimate relationships with other people and suddenly no place to find them. And so that was part of it, going in search of that kind of feeling, that kind of community through mission work and volunteer work in other scenarios and situations.
Okay. You included various anecdotes about how practicing radical love asks us to challenge our assumptions about ourselves and the world. You gave a couple specifically from Ghana that really spoke to me. One was when a hungry elderly man reached out and grabbed your wrist and you ran away.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little about these anecdotes and why you included them in the memoir?
Yeah. So I think a lot of my 20s was spent trying to understand who I am, what the world is, and what my place is in it. And certain things like those stories that you mentioned were really profound for me. Like the elderly man you talked about. My friend Rachel and I, we were at the market in Ghana. We're the only two white seeming people. I don't identify as white, but white-ish people in a sea of, African people. And therefore, to people, that screams, these people have money. And so he saw me and probably assumed that I could, feed him, which he was probably a correct assumption. And he did. He ended up grabbing my wrist, and he was clearly somebody who had spent probably decades homeless, living outside. He was very skin and bones. There was flies buzzing around him. He had an odor. He had a backpack on with probably everything he owned in it. And I absolutely shut down and froze in that moment. And something that I wanted to be really clear on in the memoir is I am not this perfect person that just has it all figured out and I'm so lovely and giving, and everybody who's ever asked me for something, I'm like, yes, here, I will share my lunch with you. I'm just a human too, and I am also just messy and trying to figure it out, because we are all humans and we all deserve to understand that we are allowed to have space to figure it out. But he scared me. I was scared. And so I ran away. I pulled my arm back and I took big steps back. And then Rachel and I beelined in a different direction across the market. And I'll still remember it to this day because, like, why did I do that? What did I think he was going to do to me that I needed to run away from him? What would it have been like if I had said, yes, I just bought myself this grilled plantain. Would you like one? Would you like this one? What difference could I have made in his life that I just completely lost out on that could have potentially been transformative for both of us? And so that kind of a thing, I think a lot of us, we are the main character in our own stories. And therefore, we tend to kind of forget others' humanity and the fact that they have stories and lives and wishes and families and hopes and dreams and feelings of their own. So in that market that day, instead of seeing that man as this is a man who has been through hard things, what could I do to help ease his burdens, help take care of him, help show him that he is loved? I didn't do any of that. I ran away instead. And so now when I'm confronted with those same situations, I look at it through a different lens of, this is a person. I don't know how they ended up where they ended up, but they have stories. There is a reason that they are in this circumstance, in this situation. And it's not for me to judge them, but what can I do to help them? So like when I see homeless people on the side of the road here in Phoenix, which there's quite a few at intersections and stuff, I try and always have something in my car, like a granola bar or a bottle of water. Or the other day I had like nothing in my car and I looked in the back seat and I was like, what do I have that I can give this guy? And I had a can of soup with like a little pop top lid. And I was like, all right, man, on the side of the road, you get a can of chicken noodle soup right now. But because he's a person too. And so many people just write him off as, oh, he must do drugs, or he must this, or why doesn't he have someplace else he can do it? Why can't he get a job? But that's not for me to judge. We're not here to judge each other. We're here to love each other. And that was one of the biggest lessons for me in learning that. A, I'm not perfect. And B, I need to do better.
Your first marriage was to a guy you met in Ukraine who turned out to be insecure, controlling, and ultimately physically abusive. Your first, perhaps subconscious move to help yourself was after a harrowing attempt to apply for a visa for you to stay in Ukraine. During that attempt, it seemed like the universe conspired in various ways to bring you home. Can you tell us about it?
Yeah. So we had all kinds of immigration struggles after we got married. He couldn't stay long term in America because he only had a tourist visa and a lot of paperwork needed to be done for him to be here. And Americans can only stay in Ukraine for 90 days. So we ended up going back to Ukraine and living in his little apartment that he owned. And once we came closer to my 90 days, I needed to visit a Ukrainian embassy to apply for like a resident status visa. And Ukrainian embassies are only in countries that aren't Ukraine. So we had to leave the country to go to the embassy. The closest one would have been in Poland, which was, a couple of hours on the bus. But my husband at the time, because he held a Ukrainian passport, would have needed a visa to go into Poland, which is part of like the EU, and has pretty stringent visa requirements. So he didn't want me to go by myself. So we decided instead to go to the country of Moldova, which is south of Ukraine. I honestly had never even heard of it before we decided to go there, because Ukrainian citizens didn't need visas to go to Moldova, neither did American citizens. So it was quite the journey. It involved refurbishing an old 1989 Russian Zhigul, which is this car made out of like just sheet metal, and sheer force of will that holds the thing together. We bought all of these parts. Vitalik and his cousin spent months in the garage. it felt like months. It was probably like 6 weeks or something, but putting this car back together. And then since we now had a means of getting around, we were like, well, let's make some scenic stops on the way to Moldova. So we visited the city of Lviv. We visited Kamieniec-Podilsky. We went to, which is like a big old fortress. There's a lot of castle ruins in Ukraine. It's a really, really beautiful place. We spent time in the Carpathian Mountains with friends of ours who had this incredible farm where they grew all of their own vegetables, made their own tea, had their own spring water in the backyard, literally this trap door that you could just open and stick your cup in, and it was the best water you ever tasted. I randomly went for a walk in the country of Hungary one afternoon because it was right there, and so why not? We had this map of Ukraine, and that's what we used to navigate the roads, right? This was before smartphones and GPS and, the internet being everywhere. And so we had this map that we used to navigate and find what road to go and kind of how far we were going to go and where to turn and all of that kind of stuff. We had lots of car trouble on the way. The axle of our car fell off. Our engine overheated. Our starter didn't work, so we would have to run and jump into the car to start it. He backed into a tree and busted out one of our taillights. There was just all kinds of things that happened. And so as I was navigating on the map, I was just kind of navigating down to the border of Ukraine because the map didn't have any of the other countries on it. We were hoping to just buy another one of Moldova when we got there so we could figure out how to get to Chisinau, which is the capital where the embassy is. And so I just kind of navigated us to the edge of the map so we could cross into Moldova. So we get to the border crossing, and it's late at night, and this guard to the border asks for our passports. He's talking to us, and he's like, so where are you going? And we're like, oh, we're going to Chisinau. And he's like, okay. And then he asks us some other questions, whatever. And then he's like, so where are you going? Like, well, we're going to Chisinau. And he was like, do you know where you are right now? We were like, at the border of Moldova. And he's like, no, you're at the border of Romania. So I had taken us just to the complete wrong country. And Ukrainians do need a visa to go into Romania. And the car had a busted taillight. So he actually wrote us a ticket for our busted taillight that we never paid because we just never, I don't know how they're ever going to find us ever again. But then we had to turn around, and it was like, well, where do we go now? So, right, I had this little map, and it has, the highways are bigger lines, and then there's other roads that are smaller lines. So we could have turned around and backtracked on the nice big highway lines all the way back to the last city, and then turned and gone to where we now knew Moldova was, because he had showed us which of the little cities on the border was the one we wanted to go to. But we were like, no, we're not going to do that. Why would we backtrack all that much when there's this little teeny tiny line that just goes like boop instead of going all the way back around? But it was this little teeny tiny line. So we're driving. It's pitch black out. It must be 10 o'clock at night. We've been on the road for probably 2 weeks at this point. We've been swimming in rivers on the side of the road instead of showering. Everything we owned smells like exhaust from this car that clearly has some sort of problem with the exhaust system. And as we drive, we found this little tiny road that turned off just into the trees in the forest. And we were like, perfect, this is the road. And so we go, we start driving, and the road turns to gravel. The road turns to dirt. It gets really, really skinny. Like, there's no way two cars could pass each other on this road. There is like literally just this set of tire tracks, like with grass growing up in between it. And I'm like, I don't know about this right now, right? And so we get to this fork in the road, and, Vitalik's driving, and he goes left or right. And I'm like looking at the map, and I'm like, I don't think there's a fork on this map. Like,
and it's pitch dark, right?
Pitch dark. Like, we have our headlights on. There are no houses. There is no nothing. We just pitch black driving through the forest. And so I'm like, I don't know. And So for whatever reason, we decided to go right. And so we turned right, and I will never forget, it was this like super steep downhill, super steep turn. We like gathered up all of this speed as we're like bouncing along down around all these potholes in the road. And all of a sudden, Vitalik slams on the brakes. And I was like, what'd you do that for? And he was like, look. And literally right in front of us, like our tires were like touching it, was a river. And we were like, oh, well, I guess we shouldn't have gone right. So then there's no place to turn around, right? Because so we ended up backing up around this steep curve, around this, steep hill, back all the way up to the fork. And we're like, let's go left. And so we go left, and this road, which had already been bumpy and bumpy and bumpy, now is getting like bumpier and bumpier. These potholes went from like, a soda can to a gallon of milk to like, I'm not even kidding, like bathtub size, like so much to the point where it was like we were driving down into a pothole and then like up out the other side like an astronaut in space ready to like blast off because you're just at this crazy angle. And I was like, let's just turn around. Let's just go back to that city. Let's try this. Like, this is not. And Vitalik was like, no, we're going. And so we just kept going deeper and deeper into the forest. Like I said, we saw nothing. There was no people. There was no road. There was barely a road. There were no houses. There was no lights. And then eventually we randomly found a man and his wife pushing a stroller along the side of the road. And they stuck out their thumb, hitchhiking. And I was like, please, God, save us and let them not be murderers. And they navigated us out of that little place. We dropped them off at their destination where they were going. And they pointed us, which way it was to the border crossing to Moldova. We get to the border crossing and it's past midnight. The border's closed for the night. We ended up sleeping in our car. I mean, this journey just goes on and on. They didn't let our car cross the border because cars have passports in Europe, apparently. And our car had a passport from the Soviet Union, which is not a country. So it was not a valid passport. So we ended up taking the bus. We didn't have Moldovan currency. We hadn't made a reservation of a place to stay. We got lost in the taxi for like 5 hours trying to find where we were staying. We were starving. We hadn't eaten. We finally found this place and it was full. No vacancy. Can't stay here. Slam the door by. I mean, it was just one thing after another. The embassy wasn't open. It was Moldovan Independence Day. The embassy was only open 3 days a week, so it wasn't open the next day. And then it was the weekend. And then, it's Moldovan National Language Day, and we're not open this. So we ended up staying in Moldova for a week trying to get to the embassy. And ultimately, I finally got to my appointment, and my visa got denied. So it's like you said, the universe was like, Ashley, stop. We're trying to make you stop. And I was like, no. These are just challenges for me to overcome. I will do this. I will succeed.
It gave me goosebumps, that part, because just before your visa got denied and you had no reason at all to think it might be denied, you felt very confident that it would be accepted. You were feeling exhausted and concerned. Vitalik had already been behaving in ways that were very difficult. And
scary.
You made a deal with God. You negotiated.
Mm-hmm.
And you said to God.
So I took the story of Gideon in the Bible, which is where Gideon is supposed to, I believe, save all of Israel. And he's like, are you sure, God? Is this like really what I'm supposed to be doing? And so he lays out this fleece, which is like lamb's wool or something knitted. And he says, God, if this is really you telling me this, in the morning, let there be dew all over the fleece or all over the ground, but not on the fleece. And then I'll know that this is really from you, that this is what I should be doing. And God did it. He made dew all on the ground, but the fleece was dry. And Gideon's like, yeah, I don't know. I'm still not really convinced. Let's do it again, but let's do it backwards this time. Let's do dew just on the fleece and the ground is dry. So wet blanket, dry ground. And so he goes to bed. He wakes up in the morning and lo and behold, wet blanket, dry ground. And he's like, okay, I guess you're right, God. I'm going to go do the thing that you sent me to do. And he goes out and he saves all of Israel. So I was thinking through that story as I was sitting there waiting to be called in the embassy. And I was like, I just want to make sure I'm on the right path here, that this is what I'm supposed to be doing. I had dropped out of college now twice to be here. And it was like, maybe I'm going the wrong way. Maybe that's why there are all of these roadblocks. So that's what I said. I said, God, there is no reason that they would deny me my visa. I've got all this paperwork, we've got everything lined up as far as living situation and what I'm going to be doing with my time, and I'm this American girl with no criminal history, and like why would they ever deny me their visa? And so I said, that'll be my sign. If my visa gets approved, we were going to be working for this discipleship training school in the city of Ternopil in Ukraine. And it was like, we'll continue on in that way. But if my visa gets denied, then I'll go back home and I'll go back to school. And I go into the interview, and the guy's looking at my paperwork, and he asked me this and that and whatever. And then he goes, have you ever been arrested? And I was like, no. And he was like, do you have a letter that says that? And I was like, no. Like, what? And he was like, well, I need you to go back to Ternopil, which is now like 9 hours of crazy adventures. 9 hours if it was straight, minus all the crazy adventures, back into Ukraine. He's like, I need you to go to the Ternopil Police Department and have them write you a letter that you've never been arrested in Ternopil, and then bring it back here and I'll approve your visa. And then he like stamped my thing, denied. And so I went home and went back to school, because that was the deal I made with God.
Next week, Dr. Ashley tells us how she survived 2 abusive marriages and the wisdom she gained in rebuilding.
Dr. Ashley, thank you for your bravery in sharing your own vulnerability with us.
Thank you for sitting in powerful vulnerability with us today. I'm Dr. Ashley.
And I'm Catherine.
Make sure to like, follow, and subscribe to the podcast as your preferred app allows.
See you on the next episode.